Today we have Daniel Rowland with us. I'm so jazzed for this whole week, Daniel. I was looking forward to this conversation, and so I'm going to give a brief introduction. All right. So Daniel has an awesome reputation. He's worked with so many great music artists and video properties. A few things that I should mention are, his primary focus at LANDR, managing partnerships and mastering music. In his past, he's worked with many multi-platinum, Grammy-nominated albums. Some of those artists are Nine Inch Nails, Seal, Meek Mill, Philip Glass, Adrian Bello, Fahad Baharbi. I messed that name up, I think.
It's okay. Mad Baby.
And several others, such as many Disney properties of Star Wars and Marvel. Daniel, how do you fit all this in? This is just incredible.
We'll discuss. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I guess all that being said, I'm just going to stop the screen share so we can see our faces. How did you get into music?
Sure, man. So I mean, like a lot of people, I came in trying to be a rock star, like at the age of 15. So I did I was playing in clubs by like 16 through about the age of 26, and then decided I either needed to go to rehab or college. And I went to college, which ultimately I think was a good decision. And I got a degree from University of North Carolina in Asheville in recording arts and technologies, and went on and got a master's degree in music technology, basically, and started teaching. And I've been a college professor for 15 years. I have 100 students right now pissed off at me that I haven't gotten their final grades up. But so I came in backwards. I came in as a professor first, and then met a guy named Adrian Bello, who I wasn't super familiar with at the time, but he's the front man for a band called King Crimson, or was for 35 years. He was David Bowie's guitar player, Talking Heads, Frank Zappa, Nine Inch Nails, all these really significant artists he's worked with over the decades. And I became we became partners. So he and I produced hundreds of pieces of music together. We traveled around the world a number of times, and just I still have a blast when I see him. He's based in Nashville. I'm now in LA. But yeah, and that's how I got into music technology. Actually, we were at a whiskey bar in Amsterdam, and we met at the beginning of every great story. And we met a guy who's now a lifelong friend, who is a creative director, and a mobile app developer. And we started a mobile app company out of Amsterdam that was doing like effects processors, multi-touch effects processors, kind of weirdo stuff that we wanted to exist to make music with. And I think more importantly, we created an app that's an album that never plays the same way twice. It's an idea that Adrian had when he was on tour with Frank Zappa back in the day, and that something that takes existing songs and cuts them up into smaller snippets and presents them to listeners in kind of new and exciting ways, along with sound effects and other things, and Easter eggs and visuals that are always changing that you can snapshot and save, and all of this kind of and stems, and just a variety of different things. So that was a big reason I got into tech, and really exploring the engagement between fan and artist, and kind of, the participation aspect of that. And, long story short, I was at South by Southwest maybe 9 years ago speaking about this with Adrian, and LANDR stumbled across me there. And that's how I got into kind of deeper into tech in the startup world, which is where I exist now. So, I basically do three things. I work on music. I'm a professor, which I love teaching more than anything, but it also keeps my ear to the ground of young creators and their pain points, which helps inform my work in the tech development space.
That is such a cool spread of exposure, being on the front lines with education and then new technology, and then of course being an artist yourself, you can understand the process and how all that works. All that being said, then, where does LANDR come in? Maybe you can share a bit about what LANDR does, what you're doing at LANDR, and how that's kind of helping you pursue some of your goals.
Sure, absolutely. You're going to see a common thread that goes through a lot of what we talk about here with LANDR, with our discussion of web3, kind of about what drives me, and what I think is important. So LANDR is, I came on, at year one, basically, with them. I've been there for about 8 years now. So LANDR is a solution to issues that we see in the music industry, right? So, more people, as we all know, more people are creating music right now than have ever been able to before, through the democratization of digital technology and the, lowered cost of hardware. But there are still barriers to entry for people. Let's pretend that you're 15 and you want to make music, or maybe you want to make music now and you've never tried it before. What are the challenges that you would face, right? It's either going to be a lack of knowledge, because it can take years, obviously, to learn how to write, record, mix, master, and then distribute a piece of music. Or there's a
Hmm.
financial barrier where you might have access to some of the tools, but not all of them. And certainly you can't afford maybe to hire professionals to do it for you every time you want to make a piece of music. And then the other challenge that people face is that once you wade in and you decide to learn the craft, there's a million fragmented solutions that you have to kind of cobble together into some semblance of a workflow. I wrote a column in February for Billboard that I'll put a link to at the end of this that kind of seemed to resonate with a lot of people in the industry about these sort of challenges and how to solve them. And that is what LANDR addresses. It's trying to meet new creators where they are instead of setting this high bar, and provide them with a cohesive ecosystem of intelligent tools. We do a lot of AI stuff that are simple but powerful and shepherd them along no matter where they are in their creator journey. So everything from, samples at the beginning of your creator journey and loops and virtual instruments to get you started, collaboration tools to live stream and work with people dynamically, or to work on projects, asynchronously as well. Um, Getting into, of course, AI mastering tools, which is probably what we're the most known for. So the ability to
Hmm.
upload a song and we kind of polish it for you and get it ready for distribution, which is the kind of the last thing that we're involved in, where we get it out to all the DSPs, and even doing things like providing, a professional network so you can engage with people who have worked with your favorite artists and get advice and learn and all that kind of stuff, and trying to, wrap that into one inexpensive offering where people can have a turnkey solution to get started, and then start tacking on all the other amazing products that are out there by sister companies of ours. So it's a big part of my DNA is to kind of, as with the teaching thing, help support, people as they're trying to do what they want to do, which is make music and be heard.
That's awesome. And when you talk about like all the varieties of tools and resources for artists, I'm sure like navigating that landscape has got to be like overwhelming, confusing.
Yep.
And are there tools that that you have found that help like onboard people into this experience, or is that part of like Lander's value prop?
It's a big part of our value prop, and it's always going to be a work in progress, right? Because there's so much these days that you need to do. I mean, geez, traditionally you went to a studio, right? You didn't have to have the studio, and you recorded, and there was a label, and there's these machinations in place to kind of get you from point A to point B. And those, it's not that those don't exist anymore, they're just not accessible, or maybe not even advisable for a lot of people that are making music. So what do you do then without that sort of structure? And yeah, so there's not a lot of companies that have gone as, if any, that have gone as broad as we have, and maybe we're crazy for doing it, but that's the deal. And you have some great companies out there like BandLab who are, doing some very cool stuff in this space as well. So we're certainly not alone, but we all kind of have our different spin and different approach, um, on the demographic that we're trying to serve.
So I really want to dig into like the perception. So as like technology evolves in the music business, I don't know if people on the call have a familiarity of like what is the sentiment in the music industry for this like yet another paradigm leap into Web3. Can you give us like a little taste? What are creators or producers and artists saying, like how is Web3 resonating, if at all, in your industry?
Yeah, well, I'll take a step back and frame it through kind of my experience in the machine learning space in music technology. And
Hmm.
because that was, now that's not such a disruptive thing necessarily, but 10 years ago, right, it was massively problematic for people in the industry that there would be these intelligent tools that would automate parts of the production process. And I got, tomatoes thrown at me on a regular basis for being an audio engineer that came in and like was going to train these, help analyze data sets and do supervised machine learning and really get behind this as a vehicle to support people who can't afford or have access to the knowledge to do whatever it is. In the case of LANDR, it was
Hmm.
mastering, but it could be anything. And but when and now that's kind of caught on. And when you really deconstruct with people what the technology is allowing, not necessarily how everybody's using it, but what the core technology can do if the right people are behind it, a lot
Hmm.
of that fear and doubt and uncertainty kind of, evaporated out into the ether, pun intended, to pivot to Web3, which is very similar, right? There's, core technology, I think, is sound. There's just a lot of media, a lot of press around it that's negative, a lot of people doing, things that are not good with it necessarily, and a lot of just,
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of noise. So when I
Hmm.
talk to people on the music side of things, they are, so first and foremost, I'm going to take a little diverge a little bit here, about kind of what excites me about this space for the music industry. But I think you have to approach it with practical thinking. So if you are, and I don't know if this is a controversial statement or not, but if you're on a mission to decentralize the entire world and take down the man, I
Yeah.
respect that. Same with like 60s free love and a component of the Occupy Wall Street movement. I get it. It's cool. But most of the world does not and will not care about that maximalist sort of approach to things, right? We have to, again, kind of meet them where they are because they're trying to live their lives. And as musicians have careers and do other things, they don't have time to necessarily go down the rabbit hole on all this stuff. So, musicians that I talk to want Web3 components. They like some of the stuff. We'll talk about the benefits of them, the potential of them, but they're going to need to sit alongside their Web2 experience, at least for the foreseeable future, whether it's NFTs and Bandcamp along the traditional way you engage in Bandcamp, or it's Coachella tickets, or it's, token rewards in Audius, which is a decentralized streaming platform, while they know their fans are still using Spotify, right? There has to be kind of a dovetail effect. It can't be this binary either or sort of a thing that you can run into sometimes in sort of the religious fervence in Web3. So there's that. Now, so there is when you sit down with people and you talk to them about what this technology can do for them, they're pretty universally excited, but there's still obviously massive hurdles to onboarding them, and more importantly, they're fans of this kind of stuff. But the empowerment of a sustainable middle class of artists, to me, is what the promise of Web3 is for music. And it's great that Nas gets in. It's great that Snoop Dogg gets in. That's great because it brings kind of more eyes to the space, but I don't care about them. I care about people who want to make a career, whether not making millions of dollars, but making maybe low six figures, and support their family and do what they love. And and they can retain, maintain, and leverage their sovereignty, of their rights and their content, which has not traditionally been the case, right? So not to ramble too much about this, right? But people are tired of the content treadmill, right? I get that a lot from artists. The fact that, they constantly have to be putting out new content, whether it's social media content or music. And then it kind of dissipates into the ether after a while, and fans are looking at their watch asking for, what have you done for me lately, right? So the promise of Web3 and tokenization, where social media posts, fan club tokens, merch or virch, all potentially retain or accrue in value and add to an artist's catalog, or I guess their portfolio, the same way their music does. So it's like, ownership of their digital identity in a way that's not really been possible before, that they have at least a significant stake in.
So I want to, I would love to have you share, like, what does the traditional, I don't know if it's even like ready to say like the old school model of music, but like, what is it like for an artist before this decentralized world was here, when they want to create music, they want to distribute music, and then maybe they reach a level of stardom where they need to sign on with an album or a distributor. Like, what does that look like for those of us that maybe don't have the insights that you do for artists, before today?
Sure. Well, I mean, the road is pretty clearly bifurcated, where you go independent and you stay independent, where you're just doing it all yourself, right? And you're trying to build a team around yourself. So that means you don't have, you don't have a social media team and a label. Traditionally, you didn't have access to distribution. That was a label thing. Of course, that's not the case anymore necessarily. Marketing, people plugging your music, people who are actively, incentivized to go proselytize for you because they have loaned you money to make your music, right? Which is kind of the record label side of things. Or you're completely independent. So, and that's basically it. I mean, you're hoping when you sign with a record label or with a publisher that they are going to go out and, if it's a publisher, really push to get your song placed in film and television, exploit the copyright, basically, which is that song. And on the label side, right, that they're going to provide the infrastructure for you to get those masters, those recordings out to the world. And, if it's, help you with touring potentially and all this other stuff that you get with that. Of course, there's a significant trade-off, right? They're not doing that for free. And that's kind of been the challenge. It's been, it's one way or the other, and they're both not easy roads, right? So what's interesting, and not to take it back to the Web3 thing, is that it's actually much more difficult, and this plays on what I was saying earlier about artists' concerns and interest in Web3. If you are signed to a record label, if you have gone that traditional route and you have a publisher, as an example, it makes it much more difficult to get into Web3, because you have a lot of extra hoops you have to jump through to even be allowed to put your music out there, or God
Mm,
forbid, fractionalize ownership of stuff. You cannot do
yeah.
that without a lot of other people checking boxes for you who may be very skeptical about this new space, which is
Yeah.
why it's actually been put in is content could continue to be a windfall for independent creators who are, a little bit more agile and have a little bit more freedom with the content they create.
Do you see that then as like a bilateral like journey? Because I'm imagining a lot of people listening are like, what are the tools and solutions and ramps we can build if it's like new apps, software, infrastructure, whatever they might be. And then what I'm hearing from you is, you have like the back of the house music industry, like the record labels, the production companies or studios, and then you have the artists, and they both have, I would say, somewhat shared goals. Like they both want to succeed and kind of together, but one has like, there's a lot more risk that they have to shoulder, and the other, maybe the artists have less risk. And I don't know if that's the case, but would you imagine then there's needs to be like, I guess, tools and infrastructure built for these like platforms to also gateway into Web3 that don't exist yet? Or is it like a
Platform
completely switch of like business model where they don't even want this because they lose control?
Right. Well, that is absolutely a challenge, and you haven't seen a ton of adoption yet from kind of the institutional players. They might have invested in some stuff, but that's different
Hmm.
than them adopting it into their own ecosystems. I think, you know, no, I believe there absolutely does need to be on ramps, and I'll talk about a couple of companies that I think are doing interesting work there for kind of the major players to get involved, because they're not going to let this be what streaming was for them, right? When
Hmm.
as many of you probably know, when digital streaming became a thing, when the ability to share MP3s, right, even through torrent sites was a thing, the music industry kind of clung to their CDs, right? They clung to kind of physical media, and they were really
Hmm.
late to the game on that. And Napster kind of changed everything, and a lot of money got drained out of the music industry, and a lot of people lost a lot of that money. So I like seeing the music industry investing. You look at Warner and Universal and Sony and some of the investments they've made, whether it's in genies and digital avatar companies or metaverse plays or things like that. They're more savvy now about not letting this go by and just saying, no, we're a walled garden. We're not going to participate in this because maybe it changes our business model. They're too smart for that now. But that does require tools. I met with a founder. Yeah. I love meeting with startups, just by the way. Like I don't work with artists like in the studio as much as I used to. I kind of look at startups like the artists I get to work with now, and I just absolutely love watching them kind of pivot and what their vision is and where that goes, and if I can kind of shepherd them along the way, I do. But I met with a girl who just got into Techstars LA yesterday, Jessica Lawson, and she's starting a company called Radia. She's looking for a technical co-founder if you know any blockchain guys, but it's a really
Bring it
interesting
on.
idea, and she's building an enterprise solution, excuse me, for record labels for NFTs. So effectively,
Mm,
it's a multi-chain wallet that makes the experience for fans and for artists really great, something better than MetaMask. It's got a better interface. The way you can kind of manage all your assets is great, but it's really designed for labels to track all of their artists, the NFTs that they have, the chains they're on, the metrics, all the data in one spot. And because they don't exist. I mean, is the major labels right now, as far as I know, don't even have wallets. That's not even a thing yet. So she's really
yeah.
forward thinking in trying to build infrastructure to ease them into this space. Because obviously the big thing right now in record contracts is everybody's trying to get NFTs excluded from their contracts as new contracts come up, and that's not happening. So now labels can make money on these NFTs because they own a percentage of them. So they're incentivized in some ways to participate.
That's really interesting. Can you share more about like some of those, excuse me, um, some of the changes that are happening with artists when they maybe are signing with a label? Like you mentioned, they want to have ownership over their NFTs. Are there other types of liberties that they're trying to grab hold of before
I mean, I
losing
think,
like control?
well, there's always other type of liberties, right? But it's like, so the NFTs is a big one, which some artists snuck in with that before they were a big thing. Yeah, I mean, geez, it depends on the kind of deal you do with a label. I mean, people have probably heard of the 360 deal, where the label basically gets a chunk of anything that you do, and that can include things even outside of music, acting gigs you get, and things like that. Anything that your music career kind of has helped bring about. So people are typically, artists are actively trying to avoid that, and labels are actively trying to get that. But we're entering into a whole new space, man. Like just the digital avatar side of things, which I find fascinating, digital idols and all of that stuff, and lending your likeness to things that we could not have really, we didn't, or maybe we knew about, but we didn't take seriously, at least in the West, because it's been a big thing, obviously, over in Japan for a long time. Or there's a company, really interesting, I'm just going to go on a tangent here, an interesting company called Respeecher, which I believe just won a couple of Emmys for their work on The Mandalorian. And they do deep fake voices. They can clone your voice if they have a few hours of a clean recording of it and apply it to anything, including a singing voice, which has not really been done before.
Wow.
So an artist can license their voice to a character, to an avatar, into an app, and really have a different level of relationship or perceived relationship with fans as they're wishing them happy birthday or whatever, in a way they could never do in person, obviously. So there's all these like new potential revenue streams, and you look at Roblox and all this other stuff that, labels, I mean, they have to keep their eye on that stuff, and they have to kind of stay ahead of the game to make sure that they're going to get a cut of that if they're investing in an artist. It's also a reason an artist might want to stay independent, because there's so many more avenues now and coming in the next few years that are going to allow them to kind of, build a little cottage industry around themselves in an easier fashion than what was possible when it was just kind of streaming and touring.
That is awesome. Well, I did not know that was possible. It sounds freaky, but I'm guessing it's the next step of like creative expression or licensing your content. You mentioned you work with a lot of startups, and I know in past conversations you mentioned a couple cool projects. Are there any that you're working with right now that are focused on Web3? You mentioned the other example, but maybe there are others.
Oh man, yeah. So, and when I say working with, I don't typically take equity or money from startups. I'm kind of focused on LANDR. I got enough still going on. I just like to meet them and kind of, if I can help them get funding or I can do whatever. So I'm everything I'm about to say to you, I do not have a vested interest in any of these companies outside that I think they're doing cool shit. So one of them, so here's a few of them, one related to music. One of them is a company called Dopr, DOPR. And if you want to learn more about the companies involved in specifically in the NFT space and music, go to that website. They keep an exhaustive list ranked by social media engagement of every company that's in the space.
Ooh.
And yeah, they do a bunch of, it's a neuroscientist runs this, and he has a bunch of really interesting technology. But the other thing they do is projections on fractionalized investments in NFTs, because that's kind of going to be the big thing over the next few years, and it's something that I'm personally super passionate about, is potential for deeper fan engagement with artists, and even building micro communities around fans supporting the artists. So Dopr tracks so Royal.io did a fractionalized NFT sale of a few songs by Nas, Ultra Black and Rare, these two singles. And so how much are those worth? Most people don't know. They're just fans of Nas, and they see, I can buy a token and I can be invested in that person's career. That's awesome. Well, Dopr actually lays out, guess what? It's going to take you 14 years to recoup on that investment you just made, if you care, which you might not care, right? And that Royal is another good example. That's Justin Blau's company that is doing mostly from established artists and previously released songs, selling partial ownership. But what they're doing, which is smart, is they're not just saying you get this asset and this asset may accrue in value, blah blah blah. They're doing what they call LDAs, or limited digital assets, which kind of wrap up the streaming royalties themselves, along with non-commercial rights, along with anything else that the artist wants. And that's really the secret sauce of all of this stuff, right? Is what is the utility that the artist is building in to these things that take the value beyond what the streaming revenue is, which is going to be pretty minor, right? And there's a couple of artists we can talk about. They're doing some very interesting stuff.
Let's do it. I would love to hear it.
All right, so a couple more. There's so many interesting companies worth checking out. Like there's a guy named Inder Full, who's a friend of mine, who runs a company called Pixelinks, which you may have heard of. Richie Houghton and Deadmau5 are key investors in that. It's a music blockchain and metaverse platform where artists can actually have their own kind of sandbox, like, if you're familiar with the sandbox, unique environments where they can build games and engage with fans and have their music be playable as you play the game. It's very cool. There's so much stuff going on. There's a blockchain based DAW. If you're familiar in DAW, digital audio workstation, is how we all make music, right? Pro Tools or whatever. It's a digital mixer you go and you record. Well, his is blockchain based, so you can actually record not record to the blockchain, but you can you know, record the existence of the audio to the blockchain and maintain ownership. And it's of course just pointing to the audio file that's somewhere else. But so you can really track as you move through the creation process who did what. And there's a few companies really doing interesting stuff around that when it comes to collaboration and recording on the blockchain. There's another company called Tile. I digress. I'll talk about this forever, but let's take it interesting just for a second here, like a particular use case about what a band is doing that I think is cool. So we'll talk more about fractionalized ownership maybe here in a second, because LANDR's even doing something I think is very interesting with that. But if you're familiar with the band Avenged Sevenfold, okay, it's kind of like a metal band, right?
Yep.
So their fan club has traditionally been called the Death Bats fan club because their logo is like a skull with bat wings on it. Oh, great. So they launched an NFT platform, and so you buy their NFT, which is effectively an invitation or a membership to their fan club, and you get you get your own one-of-one image of their kind of cartoonized Bored Ape sort of image of their logo, right? So that's yours. Of course, you get things like first dibs on concert tickets, giveaway airdrops of tokens, no lines if you go to one of their concerts. You get if you luckily get one of the more rare tokens, you get dinner with the band, free tickets for life, guitar lessons from their guitar player. There's just exclusive merch, all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what probably the most digestible thing that NFTs in the music space are going to be used for is that sort of experience. But one of the things that they've done, which is they've taken from Bored Ape, which is interesting, is that image that you get, that one of one that you have full IP rights to that. So they're pushing you to say, hey, go make t-shirts out of this. Go start a restaurant like people have done with Bored Ape. Go sell those t-shirts. Do whatever you can do to monetize this image that was before just our logo. Now it's everybody's logo, but you have your own little spin on it, which I think is really interesting. I mean, if you look, I master all the music for this show on NBC called the American Song Contest, which is kind of like the Eurovision Song Contest in the States. And Snoop is the host with Kelly Clarkson. And this week, he was on that show wearing a t-shirt with his Bored Ape on it, because Bored Ape lets you do that, right? You have the IP rights to your specific ape. And what do you think that did, not just to the value of his ape, but to everybody else that's in that community? And he's actually selling weed now in LA called Bored Ape with a picture of his Bored Ape on it, not Snoop's face on it, but his Bored Ape is a way to not only make money, but to also increase the value of this asset. It's just super interesting. And last thing on this, if you think about the way that this works, right? I mean, you have artists that are engaging with fans through this kind of, tokenized ownership, where fans can potentially financially win from being involved with the artist, right? That those things accrue in value. They get special assets. They can use this IP and do whatever they want. There's no reason in the future that via smart contract, the band can't say, you can take this IP, do whatever you want, but we'll take 10% of whatever you make. Feel free to go open a business. Feel free to go sell merch in Roblox, whatever. So it's just such an interesting sort of reciprocal relationship that can happen with this potentially that hasn't really been possible before, which is, I think, one of the things that makes it so interesting. And that's what I meant before when I said there's a direct to fan relationship now where there's no middleman, but fans are incentivized to build little cottage industries around a band or a group's or an artist's IP, and they all can potentially win from that. So it's fascinating. And hell, maybe that shared percentage goes back into a DAO that the entire fan club is a member of for investment in things. There's just all sorts of directions that can go.
Oh my God, I love this. The network effects and how the creative community can work together and monetize all their content. I mean, that is so cool. What was the band that's doing all the different kinds of merch and those like mixed NFTs? What was that one called?
The one I was just talking about? No.
Yeah.
Oh, Avenged Sevenfold.
Okay, cool. All right. I want to take a mental note of that because I want to look that up later.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, go to Death Bats. If you look up Death Bats, it'll pull up their the site going through their NFTs, and you can look at them on OpenSea and see what the floor is and all that good stuff.
Sweet. And if someone finds it while we're on the call here, please throw it in the chat so others can see it. You were mentioning fractionalized ownership in past conversations. We've talked about that with like creating, music and obviously selling music. Are you working on anything related to that, or are there any projects that kind of pique your interest around fractionalized ownership?
There is. It's such an interesting space because it's not a new idea, right? I mean, there's a company I met with in LA 5 years ago called Vest, who are very interesting, VEZT. excuse me, and they have their office at the Pacific Design Center, which I'm looking at right now from my studio. And they were doing this, very early off, doing what they called initial song offerings, which were basically micro investments in song royalties,
Mm-hmm.
working with a lot of K-pop bands and things like that. And it's just,
Mm.
different people have gone in different directions. There's a major company called Songvest who do this as well for major artists. You can buy, share in royalties of their works, but they treat them like securities. They register them with the SEC. They treat it very formally, where a lot of these other companies it's kind of the Wild West, right? They're like, it's not a security. It doesn't pass the Howey test.
Yeah.
Come get us, that kind of a thing, which that whole thing is looming over this space completely, right? It's because everyone kind
Mm-hmm.
of interprets it in a way that makes the most sense for them to launch their product. That brings me to kind of something that we're doing, which I think is interesting, because it's fine to sell, fractionalized ownership, I think, is going to be a big thing, but there's so many hurdles right now. Even just getting a wallet for a lot of people is a massive hurdle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
one of the things we're doing is we're launching a contest. All right, I'll be brief with this, but I do think this is really interesting as a way to onboard people to this concept and engage fans and creators in sort of a new way. So let's pretend
Mm-hmm.
for a second that I'm a famous artist, okay? And so I want to sponsor this contest with LANDR or whoever. And I put up some samples, right, of drum loops, vocal samples, whatever I want. All right. So
Mm-hmm.
LANDR has a virtual instrument that's free that you can download, and anybody can play those samples that the artist, myself, contributed. And what I say is, hey, everybody, go make new music, combine my stuff with your stuff, and submit tracks for this contest. Great. So LANDR's got, because we're very broad and we own a bunch of parts of the ecosystem, we have a projects page where you can go submit works, and fans can come listen to those new works created between up and coming artists and the established creator, and they can vote
Mm-hmm.
on the ones they think are actually good. It's the network effect thing. I, as the artist, tell my followers, everybody else tells their followers. That's nothing groundbreaking in and of itself. But what's interesting is that the top voted fans are playing A&R. They're getting to participate in the music process in a way they traditionally haven't. And I, as the host artist, can then go listen to the top 20 that fans curated. They rose those to the top of the pile. And I pick the ones that I think are good enough to be released. And then they're released through LANDR to Spotify, to Apple Music, YouTube, all the stuff, right? What's
Mm-hmm.
unique about that is that me as the founding artist, I get 40% of the streaming royalties of that. Any of you, let's pretend that you're the artist who submitted the newly created content that, collaborating between us, you get 40%.
Mm-hmm.
LANDR gets 10% for running the contest, and the fans who voted for the songs that the founding artist chose, right, the ones that won, they split 10% of the royalties, and no one pays any money to be involved in this. Everything is free, but everyone financially wins at the day. And there's leaderboards so fans can see who's like the best A&R, who picked the most right songs that the artist chose. And it's super interesting. And we're not doing like one of these, we're going to do hundreds of them, and just to kind of allow it to scale and artists kind of run with it, because it's just an interesting way to and then fans, of course, then have a vested interest in the success of an artist in a way that they maybe didn't before. That type of thing is where Web3 is going. We're just
Mm-hmm.
trying to do it in a Web2 space, right, with what we have that's as inclusive of everybody as we can be, without some of the problems that people see with with a blockchain and things like that. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's what the interesting thing that's going on. But there's a lot of companies doing some very cool stuff in the space.
That is awesome. And as you developed like the model for that, like the payouts and the ownership, and I guess like how the voting mechanism worked, how did you guys come up with that process? Was there something you modeled it after? Did you talk to
Well,
artists and
yeah.
fans, and how did that work?
Well, luckily for us, I'll be honest with you, we kind of stumbled into it by accident, because because we've developed all this technology, we were not thinking about it in this context. But we have the samples and the virtual instrument. We have the project management platform that very easily becomes, a page for voting and things like that. Oh, we also do distribution, right? Because we do that as
Mm-hmm.
well, and that distribution includes royalty splits between artists. Well, we can certainly automate that to do royalty splits between fans and
Mm-hmm.
anybody. It's totally scalable. So it was in really researching Web3 solutions that a light bulb went off and say, wait, we can do this with what we have, and in a way that's very approachable for everybody. And that may lead us to pivot into Web3 solutions down the line, but we don't necessarily have to. This is a great way to test the waters and bring on partners who are maybe a little skittish about diving too deep in the Web3 space, but this is totally approachable for them, and it's not controversial, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see. We're going to launch the first one in about a month.
Wow. Okay, that is awesome. Well, you'll have to let me know, and I can everybody else know. We'll make it loud.
Nice.
When you think about the tools that exist and the tools that don't exist, the friction that's out there, a lot of people listening, I think, are really curious. You know, what sort of solutions and technology can we work on? How can we empower artists and creators and producers and labels, et cetera? Are there things that come to mind when you think of like, gosh, if I just had this thing, it would be so much easier? And what might that be?
Oh man, that's a good
No wrong
question.
answers.
No, no. Well, it's, the challenge for most people in the space that I talk to
Hmm.
isn't necessarily building the technology. Like there's still a long way for it to go, but that part's cool. It's just getting people to care, that aren't already in the crypto space. So
Hmm.
where the people who are going to win here are companies, and I'm working with a couple of them now. And LANDR, actually, this is a perfect example, is LANDR, and certainly Google and certainly YouTube and et cetera are on a whole other level. But where you have eyes and ears and you have artist and fan involvement and engagement, and that's the hard part. Right now, the easier part is just building simple on ramps for them to be involved, whether
Hmm.
that's not MetaMask. That's not, I have nothing against MetaMask, but those are not things the average person wants to deal with. Can you make it look and feel like I'm on Spotify, right? As opposed to on this whole other world. And that goes for artists as well. There's not, and this girl I mentioned earlier, Jessica Lawson, I like what she's doing because she's building something so that it looks just like you're on Instagram, just like you're on anything else that you would PayPal, better than PayPal. And I think to me, it's not a simple problem to solve, but it's really just about usability and about, kind of breaking down those points of friction that people foresee in this space. So that's a kind of nebulous ass answer to your question, but I don't see it as needing any landmark shift or groundbreaking technology that's going to, be a light bulb that gets mass adoption to this and has musicians dancing in the street and all that stuff. I think it's education and it's onboarding, and those are probably the two biggest pain points.
Hmm. I love that answer because as a designer and the designers on the call, I know it feels like an area we can contribute to and work on.
Absolutely.
So I love that. So anyone listening who wants to crack that nut, please do it. It's such a common theme when we go into Web3 because like there's an abundance of technology, but the learning
Yep.
curve is like a hockey stick. And
It's
so if
ridiculous.
we can just help people with like a step ladder, let's just like white glove them into the experience, it would make things so much easier. So I totally agree with that.
Well, I mean, the deepfake stuff is going to get out of hand, right? That's a
Yeah.
whole licensing nightmare. It's funny in the music space. The thing it used to be, LANDR used to be not popular. I'll say that, with audio engineers, and now the ire has kind of shifted to companies that are involved in developing generative music, right? So things that, not assistive things, not things like if I can hum a melody, it'll kind of orchestrate that out and kind of show me how to make a piece of music, but things that completely replace the musician and offer to, really replace, sync licensing and things like that. If I'm doing an ad for TV, why am I going to pay a musician or license a song when I can just hit a button and have it compose something based upon a couple hit points I put in my video to denote where a swell should happen or something. So that's right now, those companies are the ones that are keeping people awake at night on the music side of things. As an example, I've taught mixing for years, right? Well, very shortly, there's a mixing button that's going to exist in everybody's DAW that they can push to at least get them part of the way there, right? It doesn't mean they won't go in and refine and things like that. And so, as a teacher, do I see that as a threat, or do I see that as something I can use with my students? And there are absolutely, I talk to people about this all the time across various, parts of the tech sector that are petrified of that type of thing, right? Like, is it's going to replace me? It's going to get rid of me. And to me, I'm like, no, this is great. Like it allows students to engage with the software and learn on their own more, so we can teach them more and go farther than what we're able to typically go, because we're focusing on a lot of rudimentary stuff that may not be so important in the future. And maybe that's me thinking like glass half full in that regard. But I do think, especially when it comes to automation and things like that, that it's not necessarily a bad thing. Hopefully, there's a million things people have to learn anyway, whether it's promoting their music on social media or it's, all this other stuff. Automating certain tedious parts of just focusing on the music production process I don't know. I'm not necessarily opposed to it to a point, right? Until it just becomes like a replacement and the human input isn't needed anymore, and that's a challenge. So I think it has the potential to kind of bring educator and student actually closer together potentially. I think what it's impacted is me allaying the fears of my students that they're going to not have jobs when they graduate. So that's been like, that tends to be like, I just did a lecture to this composers university, dear Lord, in London. And those poor kids were frightened to death of some of the companies that are out there. Like, how are we going to get jobs? We didn't know about any of this stuff when we started college. And I'm like, it's cool, man. It's like, none of this tech is as good as people claim it is. Also, you've got tons of time. There's a lot of hype involved in all this kind of stuff, especially anything in the AI space, as you guys are probably more familiar with than I am. But so it's fine. So I have more of those discussions now about, how to look at the long term of where the industry is headed and kind of set yourself up for success based upon things that are going to happen, right? So it's more about that than it is changing how I teach mixing or something like that, if that makes sense.
Don't worry, you'll be fine. It's just your kids that are screwed.
Right. It's kind of that.
Yeah.
New opportunities will exist. But yeah, it is. I totally get how it's a challenge for people with some of the stuff that's coming out. But
yeah.
Hey, their kids are going to be playing. If you saw the Spotify activation in Roblox this week, I mean, your kids are going to be, learning how to make music, in their metaverse of choice, which I think is that kind of stuff I think is super cool. Or there's a company, Splash, if you're familiar with them, that lets kids DJ in Roblox and create new music in Roblox in a really gamified experience. That's the direction I want to head, is getting kids when they're gaming to really be learning at the same time on the music side of things, at least. So cool companies in the space.
That's neat. Actually, can you talk more about that? Because at the education piece and like experimentation, I guess we haven't even talked about the metaverse, but maybe you want to go deeper on that. That seems like a really interesting topic.
Oh, geez. How long do we have? Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the metaverse. I did if you're familiar with the Sandbox, probably the biggest metaverse, the platform that's out there. I brought in the music team and did the music for that and mixed and mastered all the music for them, because like 2 years ago, whoa, I thought it was like super cool. Yeah. So, and they're blown up now, and it's, good Lord, God knows what their valuation is. But so, and then that other company I told you about, Pixel Links, which is doing specifically a music metaverse, which is pretty cool for artists to engage with fans. But Roblox is the king, right? And I think it's super important and now Roblox has taken some major steps forward. I mean, obviously they famously kind of did the Lil Nas X concert. It was a hit. They just did a thing with Lizzo. The Grammy Awards are in Roblox. They're doing their own award show for music in Roblox now.
Whoa.
So I can't really say much about this, but I had a meeting yesterday with a company that we're going to bring in there to do like music making competitions where people can in Roblox watch music being made, kind of like you watch esports teams as an example, and buy virtual merchandise, and buy and interact and vote and all this kind of stuff that kind of plays into what I was talking about with LANDR too. I think there's a lot of opportunity to engage, not just as fans, but also bring them in the creation process as well, because there's just some really powerful, simple tools that get kids excited about engaging in music. So I don't know, I could ramble about that forever, but that's the space I see myself heavily in the coming years for sure. I'm about to have a kid in September, so maybe that's why I'm thinking about this, but
woohoo! Congratulations. That's exciting. That's super cool. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
I was just going to ask a question. So I know you've worked with a lot of artists and a lot of cool projects in the past. This is like kind of a side question, but I'm just curious, like what's the most interesting artist you've ever worked with?
Well, this is going to be a personal thing for me, probably not for everyone else, but 100%, I'd have to say Trent Reznor, because I grew up the age that I am, and there's like a handful of bands that inspired me to not just get into music, but get into music technology, because I couldn't figure out how the hell they were making the sounds they were making. Mm-hmm. And 9 Inch Nails was that band back in the mid to late 90s for me. So to then get to go record at Trent's house and play on one of their albums and go rehearse for a tour for 3 months and all this kind of stuff, he showed me and opened a lot of doors for me, just showing me tips and tricks and meeting people and things like that. So that's probably the one for me. Even though there's other artists I've worked with, other people might be like, "What? How could you not?" That it would be nice.
That's pretty cool. And if you could work with someone else in the future on maybe like a cool fractionalized music NFT project, who might that be? based on, whatever reasons. Maybe they're working on something cool right now that you're aware of, or they've talked about it. You're like, you know what, this collaboration would be perfect. Maybe it's two artists. What's like the magic combination?
Jeez, that's a tough question. I don't know. I mean, I'm friends with a guy named Derek Ali, who's Kendrick Lamar's engineer and DJ, and Kendrick's always been somebody on my list. Like at some point, I need to approach him because that would be really interesting as far as somebody to work with. But God, I don't know. I'm drawing a blank. Like everybody, I don't know. It's to me, it's just like I find kind of legacy artists are particularly interesting, right? Legacy artist catalogs, you see Hypnosis and all these companies spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to buy legacy artists catalogs, but they, their fan bases tend to be a little bit hesitant about, Web3 stuff, right? So I would love to do more. Adrian Belew is a good example. We tried that with him and it did not go well with his fans. So really trying to kind of get them over the hurdle and dissolve some of the misconceptions around this, that would be a thing for me too. But that was, again, kind of a vague answer. I mean, I'm working with, I don't know if I can say this, but so I'm working on a Michael Jackson. I'll allude to this at the very least. The Michael Jackson project right now.
We love leaks.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is being shown externally or internally or whatever. Anyway, so there's last thing, and I know we got to go. So we were talking about, kind of speech synthesis stuff. There's another really cool tech that's out there. A woman named Jessica, very good friend of mine now, named Jessica Powell, runs a company called Audio Shake, and she's former Google too, I believe. And it's an AI, cloud-based AI service that if you drop a mix in there, like a stereo mix, it will source separate it into the vocals, bass, drums, background vocals, and any components that are in the mix. And that's existed for years, but this is next level as far as the quality of the way it's able to do it. It's almost indistinguishable as if you had the multi-tracks originally, if that makes sense for those of you who I don't know. So it's allowing us to do things like go back into songs that don't have multi-tracks. There's no way to go mix them in Atmos, and is an example, and go do that, or to go pull samples out of old pieces of music and fractionalize those and do NFT stuff around that. So we're working on some very interesting stuff. I just built an Atmos studio in Santa Monica, so the spatial audio thing is top of mind, but there's ways to do some interesting stuff with tech like that where you can pull things apart. I just saw, by the way, Google announced spatial audio, 2 days ago. I don't know if you saw that too, but I'm super excited at bugging somebody there about it. But
we'll get someone to reach out if they've heard of it. And I just noticed there are 2 more questions in the dory if we still have time. Greg, I saw yours. You want to ask your question, Greg?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dan and Rafe. This is awesome. I was originally going to ask about utility, but you gave so much there that I'm not going to ask that question. And I was kind of wondering, you mentioned fractionalization and royalties is something you're super bullish on, and kind of that IP feedback loop within the fan, creator, or musician. Yeah. What are your thoughts around regulation there? Is it kind of like ask for forgiveness and not permission, or do you have any thoughts that would kind of make you a little bit more tentative about pursuing that?
Yeah, I do think something is coming in that regard, but I do believe that I do think the Jobs Act kind of protects you with this, right? So that the idea that you can do unregistered securities as long as you're a company under a certain valuation, right? And as long as you have to look at what the annual salary versus the net worth of somebody to determine how much they can spend on that kind of stuff. It's crowdfunding, right? So the laws that are around crowdfunding, I think that doesn't work for certain companies, but for artists who are looking to sell, engage in fractionalized ownership, I think it's totally doable. And I don't know if the SEC is going to come in and regulate that specifically. And I could be not financial advice. I could be totally wrong about that. But no, I do see a path there for the artist. Now, how that works scalable for a company may be a different story. But you're right. There's absolutely companies that are treating it like it's not going to be a thing. Other ones are taking it very seriously while trying to get the SEC to pursue the other companies that are not taking it seriously. So it's a whole big convoluted mess right now. I think there's going to be regulation across this space sooner than later. I mean, you see there's announcements in California and Hawaii just yesterday, I think, about kind of, plans around that. So it's all kind of evolving, right?
thank you so much for your time. This has
You're
been
so
an
welcome.
incredible conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope other people enjoyed it. This recording is going to go on like an internal site, and we're going to get lots of attention. So thank you. And hopefully, is it okay if people reach out to you, or maybe you just give you kudos?
Of course. Here, I will real quickly, before everybody rolls out, not that you may care, I will put this in the chat. If you want any information about me or LANDR or what the heck ever, there's way too much stuff. But that's my, as Raphael knows, I love LinkedIn. I'm obsessed with LinkedIn. So I'm posting all the stuff we just chatted about. I'm constantly posting about it. Just some information on some of the stuff we chatted about today is in there too, the Flux app, the Billboard article, all that stuff. But no worries either way, just putting that up there. If you ever want to reach out and bug me about anything, I'm here to be bugged.
Awesome. Thanks you, Daniel. You're so generous. And that is it. So we'll see you all on the other side.